Welcome to the Aegance Offscript podcast, where we talk to industry leaders who share their stories, insights, and lessons, unfiltered and unscripted. I'm your host, Lawrence, and today I'm super excited to have Athan Malambo with us, the owner of Mycoza, a Cape Town-based tech company that helps startups and resellers bring their web presence online through domain registration, hosting, and related infrastructure services. Athan, thanks so much for joining us.
Lawrence, for having me.
Athan, would you mind giving us a little bit more context around Mycoza, what it is that you guys do, areas of operations, etc.?
Let me give you a brief snapshot of things. Like you said, we specialize in domain names, registrations, transfer, things like that. Also business emails and things like that. Those DNS-related infrastructures, and DNS management, web hosting, these kinds of environments.
In your time leading Mycoza, what's been the biggest strategic shift or innovation that you've introduced that has yielded some positive outcomes for you?
As I said, I come from pre-computer days in South Africa, So my take on that would be that, look, I've seen technologies involved. I've seen Web 0.1 and Web 0.2 come into play, and these ups and these downs. As technology evolves, I've gotten to see how things play out. And like I said early on, for me, the biggest shift basically is allowing myself to understand that things don't ever play out as anticipated. So I've got to take a step back and know that, look, I did believe that, back when the web was still, when we still had these dial-up modems and things like that, analog modems, and connected that way, and 286 computers and Commodores and things like that, that whoever owns a website, basically, if you own a website, that is your road to wealth, and that's not. You soon discover that that's not the case. Owning a website or having a website is not going to lead you to wealth, at all. There's a lot more to it. And to a large extent, you're dealing with still the infancy of these particular types of technologies. I mean, still relating to the internet, we're dealing with the infancy of the internet in itself, So patience matters. Understanding that, this is the beginning. Things will change, and you need to be able to understand that you need to be patient, literally, and changing that mindset of, look, I want to make a success of things overnight. That's going to burn you out. It's going to break you, and if your mindset is, something has to be an overnight success, I'm not sure if business is for you. There are other environments, Wall Street, things like that, where you can, you gotta shoot your shot that side. But business is not an overnight thing. Business literally is a living, evolutionary element in and of itself. And you need to be able to sit back and allow that growth, because as you change inside, as you change, the business changes, and vice versa. You got to be as flexible and allow yourself to change with whatever your market is predicting at the same time.
And Athan, if you were able to wave a magic wand and add one capability or feature to Mycoza overnight, it could be tech, it could be product, what would you choose and why would you choose it?
What would I choose? And why would I choose it? I would say I'm going to I would have to say probably AI. Not in the standard implementation, because we're actually dealing with we're dealing with what we can refer to as narrow AI at the moment. not general AI. We far from general AI, you know? So the AI basically in the sense of making sense of the amount of information wastage. For me, data matters. And whether it's positive or negative data matters. You need to be able to quantify data. Negative is not negative. When it comes to how data is organized, negative can be positive in its organized structure. It allows you the ability for measure. And that has, for me, the idea of being able to have AI literally accumulate day to day, decisions made in the business and things like that, so we can use that information for and study the patterns for augmentation of the business in the future. Where's the business going? We have a clearer vision of the future because now we'll have 2, 3 years of well-constructed data. We can see where we are as opposed to where the market is shifting to and things like that, and align ourselves more with what might be happening 10 years from now. But it's impossible to do it at the moment. I can't observe the news, watch where crypto is going, you know what I mean? Watch what are the latest TLDs coming onto the market from what countries, or I can't manage all of that. But with an AI agent that can actually, how can I say, go in and keep an eye on this information, would allow me basically to make decisions that would, how can I say, give me a much clearer path for where I might want to position the company and how to steer the company moving forward into the future. So by all means AI. And
Mm.
as I said, AI is in its infancy, but I do believe that the application of AI, even within the next couple of months, or even as it is for a lot of business, it's a no-brainer. It's an absolute no-brainer. You just got to find out where in your business or organization it matters. Don't look at what's advertised. Certain things matter. What applies to one business doesn't apply to another business. AI might be appropriate in one form for one business. It doesn't mean it's appropriate in the same form for another.
We follow on with that narrative around, sort of agentic AI. And you may be happy to hear that those sort of tools do exist and you can naturally tailor them to give you the types of information that you're looking for. As you say, keeping an eye on the news, tailoring that news report to specific areas of the world or subject matters. That sort of technology exists, which is amazing. Where are you from a Mycoza perspective in your AI journey roadmap development?
Look, as I said, in our AI journey roadmap development, that is something look, when you're dealing with something this powerful, it's a double-edged sword, literally, in the sense that if you're going to jump into this technology unprepared, you could damage yourself. Because if you are just jumping into it, because you're afraid you're trying to beat your competition. You know what I mean? You're trying to optimize yourself, but not looking at what the technology is capable of and what is needed inside of your organization. That AI, for example, large language modules can address. You might be setting the roadmap for a path that is going to be difficult to undo if it's not the right direction, So you might be building basically a white elephant at the end of the day. that's going to cost you a lot of money and a lot of time to undo if it's not working out for the long term. And for me, that I find that's a lot of businesses make that mistake when it comes to technology. They implement a technology and all of a sudden, for some reason, they need to change. It's not working out for them or as they anticipated. And that change can be, it can have a massive impact, fiscally and other for that business, to reverse everything. And a lot of people will go ahead and say, well, it's the technology's fault, but it's not the technology's fault. It's the implementation of the technology. It's how you use the tool, and where you use the tool that matters. It's not the tool, that's the problem. So that's why, for me, the idea would be very strategic, to look at where it's going to apply for us, because there's something that is a little bit different. I mean, our value proposition from an organization is almost the opposite. We're a managed service, so we take out the complexities of automation for the client side. For most domain registration in a hosting environments and things like that, it's a DIY environment. You come, you place an order yourself. This is most people and most business owners don't actually even understand what a domain name is. They would just come to you and say, we need business email. Now, if you provide them with a DIY environment, that's a little bit of a learning curve that they don't have the time for, or would need to access people to find that. And that's where we come in. So we try to limit that level of automation where we manage it on their behalf. And to manage it on their behalf, literally, we have to present a human interface, and say, what do you need? What kind of business? You know what I mean? What would you like your company as domain name to be? You know what I mean? And things like that. So, as I said, with that being our unique structure inside of this space, we do require a unique way of implementing large language models into our environment, more on the back end, but not necessarily on the client agent side. Because we're not looking to be 100% automated on the client interface side, because that's where our market is. That's why we get clients, because clients can communicate with humans here. I can advise you on domain names. I can advise you on hosting. I can advise you depending on the size of your company, but all other brands, you know what? It's a DIY. Go to the website, place your order. You know what I mean? You can't call the center and get that advice. What's the best domain name for me to choose? And what's the difference between a com and a co.za? You're not going to get that from any other guys, So that managed service basically is, how can I say, is our selling proposition, and that works for us. So the automation of things, the AI implementation is more on our side on the back end than it is on the front end.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. And you mentioned your back end. So when you look internally, are there any systems or operations that you've been quite deliberate about structuring, and why?
Look, I would say yes. I think one of the big things that I'm sure anyone in the tech space has, that includes ourselves, is the limitation between gateways, payment gateways. We are very limited with inside of payment gateways with inside of South Africa. And I think the lack of, and I mean, there's multiple reasons why we are limited, specifically with that technology. Is the way we're not in an open free market business wise. You know what I mean? We're in a very closed market. And that causes a lot of frustration, a lot of bottlenecking, and we can't bridge out, For us, we don't have. I mean, I think one of the biggest is what PayFast. PayFast is one of the biggest gateways, and to a large extent, they themselves are limited. It's limiting to only be able to have one or two competitors. It's very cost. It's not user friendly, and we need to, whenever it comes to the internet, we need to be able to deal with international currencies. You know what I mean? And fluidly, in a fluid way. So for me, I would say that that is something that we find frustrating because we have a small niche international market. The truth be told is that our international clients should be way above 50%, but they're not. They are actually under, at the moment, our international clients make up under 25% of our client base because of those gateway limitations. So that is something that I would change. That is something that I would, I think that would literally open us not only to international markets, but continental markets within Africa. But that is, once again, and it's not a technology fault. It's an environmental fault. The technology is there. You know what I mean? But once again, just the market structure within inside of South Africa is very limiting.
So if I understand you correctly, Ed, then you're suggesting that the 20% international client base is at that number rather than your target of 50% base purely on the payment gateway limitations.
Correct. 100%. 100%.
And how do you work around that? Are there any workarounds to get you up to 50%?
If there was a workaround, it would have been implemented. At the moment, when people want to pay, with whatever currencies, whether it be pounds or dollars or whatever the case may be, they don't want bottlenecks and they want familiarity, and there is no how can I say, the platforms, the big platforms that are out there. And yes, whether people say yes, you can have PayPal through the banks. No, that doesn't work out. In order for me to actually have a PayPal account, literally, I would need to open up an LLC in the US. You know what I mean? And incorporate those payment gateways through there, and re-register the business through an LLC that side of the world. It's not going to work. You know what I mean? The fees that I have to do, the exchange rates that I have to be involved in, the setups, no, the structure doesn't work. So there is no, actually, it's not the technology, as I said, per se, that's a problem. It's the limitations within inside of the economic structure within inside of South Africa, that we are in a closed market. And when you try to actually, if you look at it, from a business perspective, you can understand the limitations. The market should be growing, but it can't because it's stifled. So literally you are keeping us, the market is keeping us from expanding as we should, and as we should be growing, and we should be employing people, but the policies limit us. We literally are, whether we like it or not, we literally are, how can I say, incarcerated from an economic perspective. And South Africa is a small market.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly a valid concern and a valid frustration. If we hone in on client sourcing and acquisition in a little bit more detail, beyond your international aspirations and goals, a little bit closer to home, how are you going about acquiring new clients? What are your go-to-market channels that have yielded the best results for you?
Look, for me, I would say this much. Since pre-inception of the business or incorporation of the business, the only way I managed to get anywhere was word of mouth. I've dabbled in marketing and things like that and advertising, and it doesn't matter how much I threw into it. Um, it did not work out. Understanding that, you know what, I cannot compete with the bigger giants from a marketing perspective. I just can't. I don't have that kind of budgets. So strategically, I've literally been focused on optimizing the word of mouth element, you know, and whether that's through sales funneling, but it's the only thing that actually have presented any kind of merit. That, you know what, if I can make it easier for my clients to refer me, that's what matters. That's what matters. And how do I basically position myself where clients are referring me, or the business, without them even knowing that they are basically structured that way, to refer the business or not, And that's so to me, literally that element of things, I don't know if you'd call it marketing. I don't know if you'd call it branding, but maybe it's a bit of both. But I've literally used myself, and that's why, I mean, even with the idea of podcasting, with the idea of the fact that, you know what, now technology is at a stage where anybody has access to the world at the flip of a switch or a camera. So, I mean, how are you not in front of a camera advocating for your brand, for your business? So for a small business or concern like me, these things matter. The world's changed. We didn't have this 30 years ago, 20 years ago. We didn't have these kinds of internet speeds. I can now be the evangelist for my brand, which I should be. So strategically, that is something that I've been focusing on, and as I said, it's not just one funnel. It's a number of funnels that I'm looking at, focusing on. It's not only being in front of camera, but it's also things like email marketing and things like that. It's strategic elements that have their own little funnel aspects to them that are being tweaked, and that seems to be working. That's the only thing. But look, it takes time, but what choice is there? We have the time.
And do you leverage reseller or agency partnerships to try and de-risk referral-based client acquisition and scale your client reach?
We do. We do. Look, we haven't. We do. However, it's not structured. As it hasn't been. It's there. It's in existence, but it's not structured. And look, referral in itself, because of the internet and because of the kinds of technologies that are coming out now, even the referral element is something which is subject to change. And if you look at it, I think there's something where AI or large language modules can play a very powerful role, in that specific space with referral. And it's something that I'm observing and things like that. It would be something that I do think will take a little bit of time before it becomes something that is foolproof. And it's a matter of time before we see some kind of AI platform coming into play that kind of has that, how can I say, that structure solidified, where anybody would say, look, this is something that I have to, this is as important as email. and it's going to be something that I plug into my organization, and it's going to evolve in and of itself, but a necessary plugin. So yes.
And if, Ethan, we take a step back and we look at Mycoza holistically as a fully functioning business, what parts of the business are you happy with? What parts are working really well at the moment?
Look, the parts that are working really well and that I'm very happy with is corporate or business-based email. Email is a staple. Okay. Nothing with your email account now, basically, everybody has a Gmail account, and the same thing applies when it comes to email. We can do without our telephone calls for a day, but nobody can do without emails. You know what I mean? For a day. So your email account basically is the gatekeeper, okay, of everything. So even though the technology itself is probably one of the oldest forms of internet-based technologies, and which has evolved the least, there haven't been much changes when it comes to email. You know what I mean? Email's just been email, And I think that what's exciting is where email and the experimenting on these hybrid technologies that combine email, you know what I mean, with instant messaging and things like that, and especially where large language modules are going to be taking these technologies for the next level. Because as I said, we didn't have the capacity to evolve email. Email has been stock standard since inception, literally. It hasn't changed much. But I do believe now that we will start to see hybrid change with the inside of this particular technology. So that is something that I'm very excited about. Another thing that I'm very excited about is the domain name space, specifically the co.za, which has been a battleground over the last few years in South Africa. Okay. And it's been a battleground because the only option there was co.za as a commercial TLD with inside of South Africa. And we all know that, look, that's a commercial TLD. It's a South African TLD. It's a very powerful and the strongest TLD on the continent. But more TLDs locally have to come on market. We have to open up that space to accommodate more TLDs that are better functioning, and maybe some that are not commercial, non-commercial, which are only for South Africans. So that space, and we've been engaging with stakeholders, local stakeholders in the country relating to that, and it is an exciting space. And in actual fact, to the extent that there was a little bit of disruption with inside of the policies, with inside of the space a few years, 2-3 years ago, for the co.za, and immediately that disruption led to the opening of the launching of the .Africa, meaning that the markets are not going to, the market is saying that, you know what, there is a massive market, and all it needs is a little bit of interference with what is already working for new markets to come about. So everybody, the .Africa is something that is just growing by storm. If you're not familiar with it yet, trust me, with inside of the next 24 months, you absolutely will be familiar with the .Africa. So these kinds of spaces and innovations and the markets opening up, these are the exciting elements for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And conversely, if those are the elements that you're excited about and that are working really well for the business, what elements are keeping you up at night? What's frustrating or what's under pressure right now?
The frustrating part and what's under pressure right now for me, I do think that It's probably more of a personal aspect because I'm at a stage where I've got to look at my exit strategy because my exit strategy is directly connected to the not so far future value of the business, and what I mean by that is does the business stay a small business, or do I take the risk by actually um, looking at private equity, investment, risk capital coming into the business, and giving up part of the business. And am I ready for that? So, but once again, it's limited. Look, there's a lot of fun to be had steering the ship, on your own. There's a lot of fun. You don't have to. It's a lot of fun because it's up to your own devices. But when you are faced with a board, the game changes. When you are answerable to a board, the game changes. Financial stakeholders, the game changes. And those are the kinds of things like, what do I want to achieve in relation to the sustainability of the business well after I personally have exited the business, and that's the kind of thing. Because at the moment I'm having a lot of fun. Am I going to have fun when I'm being held accountable by a board? That's a whole different kind of pressure. That's a whole different kind of reality. But there is no way out of this to a large extent. I cannot, it doesn't matter what I do. The only way to absolutely scale is to bring in investment.
Those comments segue very nicely into my next question. I wanted to get a sense of, what's next for Mycoza. So if you look at the next 24 to 36 months, what's the boldest ambition that you have? Is it about getting outside investment and scaling, or are there other goals and objectives that you have on your radar?
Look, I think for me, it's a matter of, as I said, look, I'm looking at options, but before I can play into these options, I need to be at peace with myself from a personal perspective, that my own peace is aligned with whatever option I decide on. I want to know that, what, 20, 30 years from now, I want to know that was the best choice I could have made at that time. I don't want to sit with regret, at that time of my life. I'm not interested in sitting with any kind of, wow, I should have done this. So for me, these are the kinds of things, as I said, they're more personally related because I still do influence the business, from a personal perspective. Where I am from a business-wise is not so much a corporation. It's literally still, in a large sense, a form of self-employment, But once I am no longer fully in charge of the driver's seat and the scaling happens, then it becomes autonomous. And my thing is that being someone that enjoys control, you know what I mean, does this align with my personality, and that's, yeah, that I would say that's it. So just the alignment element of business and me as the entrepreneur driving this organization.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one because, as the saying goes, hindsight is best sight. Looking
Exactly.
back, you often are able to see whether it was a good decision or not. In the
Correct.
moment, it's really tough to make the right call. And you hedge a couple of bets, you take a few risks. I mean, are you looking at some sort of external threats or disruptions in the sort of broader landscape to perhaps guide your next decision around, what the next 5 to 10 years looks like?
Look, the disruptions, I do think that I don't see any obstacles from a competitive perspective and things like that, only because the level of technology that we're dealing with, DNS and these kinds of things, it's something that just to give you an example, the only environment, the most sophisticated DNS environment there is on the continent is South Africa. Okay. Outside of South Africa, the DNS environment almost doesn't exist. So it's a very comfy and cushy position to be in when you look at the fact that the markets that you are going to be penetrating haven't even started emerging yet. They're not even at the beginning. There still needs to be such a lot happening into Africa, and it is happening. And before anything can happen, a government needs to be stabilized. You know what I mean? Before economics can take root, you know what I mean? In that stable environment, and thereof, moving forward. But what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of potential. There's nothing that I look at relating from a technology perspective that I would think, wow, you know what? Soon there's going to be no oil. Everything's going to be dry. That this is a limiting environment or a limited environment within inside of our scope. No, in actual fact, when it comes to technology, I think anybody in the technology space on this level is uber excited. You know, there's a lot that can be done and will be done.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like the future is certainly exciting and it's green fields or blue sky opportunity. If
Yeah.
we look at the broader infrastructure, web services, domain landscape, how do you see that evolving beyond the next 10 years? What does the future look like for that landscape?
That is, look, to try and augment that is really hard at this time because it's like it's trying to augment where LLM will be a year from now. It's difficult to augment a week from now when it comes to large language modules. It's really hard because you are dealing with founders in a space that are not neurotypical. These people don't think like like the typical person, So you can imagine the shock and the awe with every single day within the kinds of technologies coming out. And this is the tech space. Anybody that thinks that they can augment it. Look, there are other spaces that are much easier to augment. You know what I mean? But trying to augment this in and of itself, I would say that at what percentage you're going to get it right is minimal. It's literally trying to make sure that everything exactly where Bitcoin's going, where crypto's going. No, you don't. You absolutely don't. There are too many variables at play here. So no, we don't. And that's part of the excitement. That's why it's an exciting space to be, because you can't predict, you know. You can have a slight idea, but to think that you can actually have an accurate prediction, no, you're going to be wrong,
Mhm.
and that's what makes it exciting. I think that's something that everybody enjoys about the space.
Mhm.
Once you can predict, things become boring, unstimulating. You're dealing with Groundhog Day to a large extent, and especially if your predictions are accurate.
If our viewers and listeners want to reach out to you, connect with you, where's the best place for them to do that?
Well, look, I'm YouTube. I've got a channel that every now and then I put something up on. People can also reach out to me at malambo.nom.za. Okay. Um, and yeah, even Mycoza, mycoza.com. But Google me. I would say the most reliable, malambo.nom.za. All my details are up there, access to me. I'm also on Facebook and LinkedIn and things like that. But don't worry, whoever reaches out to me, it will consolidate and send it to me directly through one particular platform. So everything is consolidated. You can just Google me, and my details will pop up.
Excellent, Athan. Well, thank you for giving us an opportunity to look inside Mycoza. It sounds like there's a bright future ahead of you. And with that being said, a couple of key decisions that you would need to make along the way to position Mycoza in that future. I'll certainly be keeping a close eye on yourself and the company, and waiting with bated breath to see what the future holds for you. So thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Lawrence, thank you for having me. And yes, as I said, look, everything is about excitement. The idea about tomorrow is to going into it enthusiastically. And who could be more excited being in this particular space, or the technology space, and being positioned in Africa? The lights haven't been turned on yet. Wow. You can
Yeah,
imagine the opportunity.
absolutely. Well, let's leave it at that, Ethan. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Lawrence. Take care.
Well, thanks everyone for listening. I really appreciate it. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Please hit the like button and the subscribe button if you haven't yet. And we look forward to seeing you on the next podcast. Cheers.